work session. And Councilor Kosher-Body will join us shortly. We have an abbreviated work session today, 1 hour, and then an abbreviated regular session to make room for our town hall later. So I'll let Vera and Laura kick it off.
Evening, everyone. Thank you. Vera Colias, Laura Weigel, here, the planning manager, and we have Joseph Brealey, our assistant city manager, here as well to talk about a proposed code amendment package addressing affordable housing and affordable housing incentives. I prepared the slides yesterday, so that's the day that is on the slideshow. Okay, Laura. Kick it off.
Okay, so why are we talking about this, about the affordable housing code incentives? Well, we've been kicking around this idea for a long time, so we're really excited to be here tonight. And it's actually part of our housing production strategy implementation. And we adopted that back in 2023. And this has been on our work plan to tackle in 2025. And so just like that, here we are at the beginning of 2025, coming to you all to talk about this. We've got 8 strategies, new strategies in the housing production strategy document that we will be continually rolling out over time. And this is the first one. The next one that we're going to be talking about is increasing density in our high density residential and having that conversation. And so that tonight, it's just about the affordable housing incentives. And then, yep. So like I said, affordable housing incentives, that's what we're talking about, including things such as density bonuses, which is language taken specifically from the housing production strategy. And just I wanted to be able to capture that. And so we're trying to get more units, more affordable here in the city. So how can we bring some incentives to the table to hopefully get some more things built? And that's that. And so we're going to roll into the ideas that we've brought. And I think this is really great. I think we're really glad to be here tonight as a work session. We really enjoy these work sessions because it is in fact meant to be a work session. We've put together some ideas, we have some thoughts, and we've also talked a little bit. We keep talking internally about things we keep thinking more about it, and Councilor Anderson had asked some questions earlier. And so I hope that we'll bring those up and we can address them through this dialogue. And so it's really meant to be a work in progress. And so we can get to a good space that we all kind of agree on moving forward. And with that, I'll hand it over to the pro with the code, Vera Colias.
Okay. So what we have before us is a code-based approach to addressing affordable housing supply and affordability. So that's our wheelhouse, is the code. And so we want to see how can we, through the zoning code, through regulations, either design and development standards, how can we create some incentives from the code side to get more housing and more affordable housing constructed. We are proposing to consolidate all the incentives into one new section in the code. When we pulled some of and we had this discussion last year when we talked about Senate Bill 1537, that is a whole package of, it's sort of the variance statute. And so we've pulled some of those things in here. I've already made some tweaks into my version of it as of half an hour ago, so we can talk about that here. But the code language is a variety of incentives for qualifying developments, starting with that the development has at least 3 dwelling units. And it's a package of variance requests, is sort of how we're looking at it, to existing land use regulations for both design and development standards. It's as proposed, and it's not dissimilar to the Senate Bill 1537 package that we are proposing that someone could package up 10 distinct variances as one variance application. It would be an expedited type 2 review. So there's still public review. It's a planning manager decision. So there is still public notice, planning manager decision, but we've compressed the review timeline to 100 days instead of the 120 days, even though I don't think a type 2 has ever gone that long. But we're kind of trying to put together a package that streamlines things for someone that's proposing an affordable housing development. Okay. So qualifying development. So who can apply for this package of incentives? Qualifying developments have to be, as I said, a minimum of 3 dwelling units as part of the development itself. And here we have sort of the affordability requirements so that, and these are or, so the entire development is either 10% of the units are priced at 50% of AMI or below, or 20% of the units are at 80%, or 50% are for qualifying residents, or there's a mix of affordability at or below 120% AMI. And so you can see that, it's fewer units that are more affordable, and kind of that's how the toggle works for the list. If someone wanted to propose a 100%, all the units are affordable at 80% or below, then we've proposed that the incentives would be increased by another 10%. So there's an even larger bump. And I know that Councilor Anderson, you had some questions about the height bonus language in there, and because you asked, I know it's not clear, so I thank you for the review. When we talk, there is a height bonus as one of the incentives, or a height, an additional story, or 12 feet of height. And what we were proposing is that even if you're at 100%, you don't get an extra 12 feet or an extra story. And I think by adding the language in there, that was confusing. So I think we would propose language that says, except for the height, or we would do that. So what we were not intending is that you would get 2 stories of additional height for the qualifying development, unless you all told us that we should. So, but I realized that was confusing in the language. So I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Can I clarify again? I'm
Please.
still struggling. So you're saying,
Okay.
if you're going for option 3, where 100% of the units are at 80% AMI or below,
Yeah.
they're eligible for everything but for the height incentive?
No, so because if you're at 100%, all of the incentives are bumped by another 10% on top of the baseline incentives.
Yep.
You get an additional 10% on all of it. But when we were writing this, I realized, but we also have a height bonus. We have a height incentive too. Did we mean to double that? Like, it's not a 10% of one story, that doesn't work, right? So it's either, do you get another story or is it not? And we landed on, no, that's the one incentive that you don't get extra if it's a full 100%. At least that's how we've proposed it. We can certainly talk about it, but and I appreciate the question because.
So should it
the
say
words.
an increase of 1 story or 20 feet? Or whichever is less is included as a part of the section, because it's referencing the future part of the section, or?
No, I think it shouldn't be in there at all. Or that we say something about the height incentive is not included for additional credit or something. Like, there's a way, I just want to make sure that people didn't think that they also were getting extra. So we will reword that if that's the direction that we receive from you folks. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. And then part of this section also talks about the continued affordability. So the project has to include all the information and evidence that we need and procedures proposed to maintain the continued affordability for the development for a minimum of 99 years. And I realize that in the code, we sort of have 3 different kinds of projects or what kinds of incentives they're getting, and they're all 99 years. When we pulled this from a couple of different other codes, and they had different timelines for different kinds of incentives. And so it was a good catch, Councilor Anderson, they're all 99 years. Why do we have all these? So we could consider consolidating and just saying, this is what the continued affordability is, regardless of your package of incentives, if it feels too redundant or too repetitive to have them all in there. But you're correct, it's 99 years is the proposed continued affordability for any project that is taking advantage of these incentives. So. Sure. No. Yep.
Okay, so I noticed in one place, I think the staff report said 30 years, and then it said 99 years. And you proposed, but in both places, you proposed the same for all. I guess I thought, it seemed to me like if the city's investing, that it should be longer than maybe if the city's not investing. So I kind of wanted to throw that idea out there. I guess my bigger question is, how do you enforce this? because I remember having this conversation with Layla Aman, who, when we were talking about some incentives, and she was like, oh yeah, there are companies that'll come in and they'll enforce, they'll collect or they'll monitor. And then she kind of backtracked from that. So how would we ensure this?
And I'm glad you brought this up. The staff report did say 30 years because originally it was. And then when we had a couple of different readings on the back of house, I changed it in the code and I didn't change it in the staff report. So it was intended to be 99 years. It is a good point about should projects with city funding have, if we're investing in a project, should there be different timelines? We can certainly talk about that. As far as the sort of the monitoring and maintaining of the affordability, I'm going to ask Joseph to come up and talk about that.
It's a good question, Mayor. It's one that's on top of my mind too, and has been since I've been thinking about this as well. There's a couple of ways to do it, and one is certainly not to say the city will be doing the monitoring and enforcement over 99 years, because it won't work. We don't have the ability. So what I intend will likely happen is that we will have folks in development that are doing development that are using HUD funds, federal funds that already require this 99 years already. And so they'll act as the fiduciary agent that will watch over that property for 99 years. However, in the small chance that a small developer comes through the doors and wants to do something and utilize these and create some kind of affordability income restriction on their unit, then they would have to show they'd have to show us how they do that and how they intend to putting it back on them to show us how they do it. Deed restrictions are possible using easement companies that, similar to what Layla Aman was talking about, there are out there, but to put the onus on them to show us how they would do it and how it would be enforced and monitored for 99 years before we say yes to offering them incentives. So I don't think it's us, the city. We're offering incentives and saying, this is the type of housing we want, this is the type of development we want. In order to get some of the perks here, you have to show us how you'll meet them.
So when you talk about, I was a little surprised that we weren't having separate code for multifamily and middle housing, I guess. And when you talk about multifamily, I think you're probably right. Like it's HUD, there's going to be a mechanism, right? But when you talk about somebody who might be trying to use this for a middle housing development of four units or something.
Yeah. I will be interested to see if we actually see that. I guess that's what I'm kind of curious if we'll actually see, because I think what we most often will find in smaller developments will be like Milwaukie, short stack Milwaukie, which they're using a land trust model that operated by another entity, as well as they're receiving county funds, but that are attached to federal funds. So there's also those elements as well. So again, at this point, I'm not, I would be surprised if we got a lot of smaller people trying to use these incentives, because the amount of just work that's involved in order to make this work financially for them, but also having a unit that's restricted for so long. Like, it's a lot more work. This isn't something that I think we'll see often, I guess, is just the point. But I could be wrong, and I'd be happy to be wrong.
Okay.
I have a quick question. It's probably the slide that you just said. Thank you. Sorry, I'm late. My apologies. And you guys might have covered this already, might have been asked already, but I just had a question on the 50% portion of total number of proposed dwelling units are for qualifying residents and or a mix of affordability at or below 120%. Isn't that pretty high rent at 120% AMI? Wouldn't the rent come out to be over $2,900, something like that? Because 120% is what, 100 and something thousand a year?
Yeah, AMI. I looked up AMI today. For a family of four, it's 117,000. For an individual, it's about 82,000.
120%? I mean, is that?
That's 100, that's AMI, so
Right, so
120.
120%, is that the target we're looking for? I'm just curious, the math, why didn't we go at or below 100?
We certainly could. I mean, that's part of the conversation.
Oh.
This is, the 120% is just common with workforce housing, that's what it's speaking more to. So if that isn't something that council is interested in doing, then by all means.
Yeah, it's curious more on if there was a math.
Yeah.
I do think there's a bigger conversation about this, but I kind of wanted to because I had a lot of questions about
My
that too.
apologies. I'm sorry.
But I wanted to kind of let Vera get through the rest of her. We'll circle back to that point, yeah.
But there are geese up. So, okay.
Council President.
In the staff report, not in the code section, under the continued affordability section, it says projects with city funding. And down below that, it says budget impact none. So how can there be no budget impact if there was city funding?
I believe, Council President, I think that's what we're speaking to there is using like CET funds. So I guess that it would be a budget impact, but not necessarily like a general fund impact.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that just requires a little clarification, I think.
Certainly. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilor Anderson?
Joseph, to your point, I'm seeking a little clarity here. You're saying that the timeline for some of these categories might be a little long for small scale developers to be building affordable housing. And I guess I'm wondering, you mentioned that in other codes, they have a staggered approach for these different types of incentives, where if you're providing city funds, it's the most stringent requirements, and then it kind of decreases from there. Do you have examples of code that does have that more staggered approach that we could look at, or an understanding? I guess when you say this is a really difficult hurdle to surmount, I don't want us to provide opportunities in our code for affordable housing that no one is actually going to use. And so understanding where we have to set that hurdle so it's usable by those small scale developers for some of these less intensive investments might be helpful context.
Yeah, it's good feedback. I don't know about other codes that have that broken down. We've looked at a few that I don't remember seeing that myself. The 99 years again comes.
Sorry, I'll clarify. The three categories that you have here, you were referencing that it was broken down in some other code, or the three categories that you call out are projects with city investment, projects density bonus only, projects with single incentive. So that's what I was referring to.
There was an earlier version of I think it was Happy Valley's code. And I think we were looking at some stuff from SB 1537 as well. And there were 10 and 30 years was in there as well. That's probably where I know that's where the 30 years came from, but I don't have my old drafts of the thing.
Yeah.
And so we can certainly come back and talk with you about that or provide that information if there's, varying lengths of time for different kinds of incentives. If we want, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, my recollection on seeing previous codes or other codes is it's always been 30 years. That was kind of a standard for a long time. And then the idea of moving it to 99 years is because that's turned into be more of an industry standard with over the last 5-10 years. So that's why there's some mix up with some of these years. The 10 years, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where that came from. So. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Continue on? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Next couple of slides are getting into sort of what the incentives even are. So in the code that we submitted or that we were proposing, and again, we pulled some of these from 1537. We kind of called out which ones didn't really apply to us. And there are already some changes I'd like to chat about here. For example, the side and rear setbacks talks about a 10% reduction. Our current code, type 2 variances are different from this already, so we'd like to make that the same. So the side yard setback incentive would be, 40%. The front, rear, and street side would be 25%. So some of these numbers are already going to change, but they're going to go up because our existing code actually already has greater incentives than what's proposed in 1537. The remainder are actually the same, but the setbacks are the ones that are different. But common area or, minimum vegetation for the property, 25% reduction, lot area, lot width reductions, and maximum lot coverage increases as well to help kind of provide more space, for development on a lot. And then we also talk about multi-unit developments in the, so a residential only development in the downtown mixed use zone currently is reviewed against the downtown design standards, which are much more significant from a design standpoint than our regular multi-unit design standards. So we are proposing that if you're doing a multi-unit development in the DMU, that the incentive is that you're actually being reviewed against the multi-unit standards, not the full scope of the downtown design standards. We can talk about that, Mayor, baby. We can see what you're saying there. But there are some, materials, and there are some things that are in the downtown design standards that cost more money from a construction standpoint. I had a question about it today, actually. So if that's a way of getting things built that still meets our multi-unit design standards, but they wouldn't be the downtown, something to be discussed.
Can I ask,
can do now,
before
Vera,
you
right?
No.
change off that slide, is there any, I guess I'm worried about the common area reduction and the lot coverage reduction and ending up with no common area, no green space on lots.
Yeah.
I mean, I've already heard complaints about the small cottage cluster on 40th and how little green space there is there. So if we talk about even reducing that more, and how does that work with our tree code? So,
Yeah.
I mean, will we set a minimum? I mean, what would be, if we did all these, if somebody got all these things, what would be the
Yeah.
resulting green space?
It depends on the size of the lot that you start with, of course. So we currently already have a lot coverage increase that's in our code right now. You can do another 10 percentage points. So on a 5,000 square foot lot, you could go up to a 40% lot coverage in our RMD zone already. So you have a 2,000 square feet, footprint there. But with the setback, I mean, you could glue some of these setbacks together, already, for an existing property. I mean, there still is green space required, but it could conceivably not be that much. Your setbacks are really going to be, but your minimum vegetation in our RMD zone right now is 35%. So there's. or
And you
25
still have to plant the tree coverage
Well, that's
per
the-
our tree code?
The tree code is a whole separate code, so that's, we haven't, there's, in the list of incentives, there's kind of the other, the one where somebody could ask for other stuff that isn't listed here. I would imagine, that's a conversation to be had about what other things could someone ask for to kind of make the development pencil out better, and it could be tree code kinds of things.
Yeah, and honestly, if the council also thinks that's not a good incentive to offer, we can also say, we can strike it as well. Like,
Correct, yeah.
absolutely.
Though I would say it's still important that less green space means more units, which is the whole point. We're trying to get more units. That's kind of one of the points of this code, is that we are in an affordable housing crisis, and we're trying to get more units built. So there's trade-offs.
Right.
It's just something to keep in mind.
Right. Council President?
Yeah, I share some of the same concerns as the mayor, as I think that, there's basically a tension here with those kinds of things that we're trying to achieve. Obviously, what we're trying to achieve is more housing units. But at the same time, I don't want to, I am concerned about sort of saying, we don't care what you do as long as you give us more units. So I think that there's a basic tension here. And so I asked the question, why 25? Why 25%?
It's a starting place
point,
that we utilize from other codes.
Is that right?
Quite frankly, yeah. It's what other cities have done.
It was a,
Yeah.
I think it'd be helpful to see some, here's a 5,000 square foot lot, here's a 8,000 square foot lot, and maybe some idea of what it means, like in terms of what's actually left if somebody takes all the maximum variances. Yeah. Councilor Savage-Jordan?
Thanks. I'm curious about some creative and innovative ways that developers might be able to work with us around stuff like the tree canopy. Like, I know it's probably a lot more expensive to build an eco roof, but is that factored into the tree canopy? Can we do things like that?
I don't think it's part of the tree code now, certainly. We'd have to have that conversation with the urban forester and with Peter Passarelli, I think, and see kind of what you could get credit for as an alternative. Yeah.
It seemed like what came to mind is there's a building off of, I think, MLK on the way into Portland, and it has all of these trees that are like part of the facade on the building. So I mean, they're small trees, but it seems like a really kind of creative way to bring a little bit more tree canopy into a development. And again, it's another investment that the developer has to make, and maintain. And I suppose that if you're accessing, the federal funding for these, then prevailing wage comes in, and then it makes the whole development a lot more expensive in general, right? So I guess I'd be really curious to know if there are other jurisdictions that are incentivizing creative solutions around green space or common areas or things like that that are not, at the ground floor level.
That's a good question. We can look into it. I think that when we looked into this a little bit before, we didn't find a lot of good things. It's really complicated, I think, to figure out the package of incentives that's going to work and give you what you need. And I don't think there's a lot of great solutions. We'll go back and look at it again and see if somebody's come up with something creative. But I remember going back through it and just not finding a lot of really innovative stuff, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard for us to be the innovator all the time. And I guess I'm also wondering, Joseph and I are on the Housing Advisory Board for the Housing Authority of Clackamas County, and there are developers that are on that board. So I'm wondering, what kind of conversations are you having with the development community to see, what things they're kind of running into? What are these? Even though these are examples that we find in other codes, is that still advantageous to develop affordable housing? Or do we need something like the Affordable Housing Bond 2.0?
Yeah, and we did talk about, actually, we talked about that, taking whatever package of incentives that we kind of get drafted that everybody comes to a good space with, and running that by some developers and asking them, would this be enough for you all? Or what should we be doing that would be different than this to make sure that it kind of passed the sniff test, and trying to get them involved, maybe even, in between the time that we talk to you all and the time that we go back to the Planning Commission, and just trying to gauge what people might see as barriers or good things that we could change.
And certainly in my conversations previous, just with developers in general, certainly affordable housing developers, and obviously through SB 1537, a big part is just having flexibility and offering flexibility to the developer in order to get more space, get more density, create more units. And so this is also to address the things that the governor is also trying to address. So generally speaking, yes, these are things that developers wish to see and have wished to see. The extent that we're talking about, yeah, we'll find out more there. Yeah.
I would, in addition to the building that Councilor Stavanger pointed out, I feel like there is a building along the Orange Line somewhere that does have rooftop trees and like maybe even 2 levels, like balcony and rooftop trees. So, I mean, I do think there are people exploring that. I don't know how much more expensive that gets in terms of the actual building. So, whether somebody will think that's a good trade-off or not, I don't know. But
Well, and whether
I do
those are affordable units, those are probably market rate units, not
Yeah.
affordable units.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment. The tree code is not technically a land use code, so we don't have a process to seek a variance for a tree code requirement. It's a standalone code. And so to figure out whether or not a green roof or trees on the side of a house is an adequate solution, the code would need to incorporate something that has a functional equivalent analysis or something like that shows the benefits of the canopy as the code requires would have to be met somewhere else, because we don't seek variances to things in the tree code. We specifically drafted it that way.
I think that's helpful, but does the tree code explicitly say that the tree must reside in the ground?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't believe it does specify that. Yeah, you made her find a big loophole, like you can move that canopy around wherever it need to be. That's an interesting entrepreneurial idea.
We live in rough times. We need to come up with creative solutions.
Yeah, so that, to go down that hole, we'd have to look at tree code ideas. And certainly there are consultants out there that look at the idea of what's the benefit a tree canopy provides and what would be a functional equivalent and so on and so forth. So an entire rooftop of grass likely doesn't provide the same benefit ecologically as, a similar number of trees, just based on carbon uptake and things like that. But, I'm not an expert in that, but I just wanted to make the point that it's not a land use code. So we don't have people coming in saying, well, I want to develop, so I'm going to seek a variance in what your tree codes require. And I'm going to do it by planting X, Y, or Z. So.
Oh, sorry, Counselor Anderson.
Can I clarify, in our RMD, the minimum lot size is 1,500 square feet, or?
It depends on the type of housing you're building.
Okay.
So townhouses because, well, if we take the middle housing land division off the table for a moment, because there is no minimum there. So, but townhouses have a maximum of 2,500 square feet.
Okay.
Duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes is 3,000 square feet.
Okay.
Single-family homes are 5,000 square feet.
Maximum or minimum?
Minimum.
Okay.
We don't have maximum lot sizes, except for the townhouses.
Except for, okay.
Yep. And then cottage clusters and everybody else need to be, or cottage clusters are 7,000 square feet minimum
Okay.
and above. So, yeah, so we have very small minimum lot sizes for middle housing, except for cottage clusters. Yeah.
Okay. I just would want to understand better how that minimum lot area then would interact with these other requirements for our different middle housing types, to make sure that we can see middle housing being built with this affordable incentive. So, and maybe it's my own lack of understanding, but I'd want to dig into that one a little bit more.
I think we need a little bit of clarification on, I'm not exactly sure I understand the question, Councilor Anderson, sorry.
So fair. If you have a 10% reduction in your minimum lot area requirement, does that impact the minimum lot size that's allowable for a cottage cluster? Does that impact the minimum lot size that's allowable for different townhomes or different building types? And so understanding maybe how this minimum lot area change would implicate our different housing types and just the impacts of a minimum lot area change of a 10% reduction in the standard, I think is helpful.
If I could,
Yeah.
I want to make sure, I think I understand your question. And so as an example, I have a 6,000 square foot lot and I would like to build a cottage cluster on it, but it's not 7,000 square feet. So I'm going to seek a variance for a 6,000 square foot lot for the cottage cluster that I want to build. I hope I'm answering your question. If I'm not, tell me. If it's affordable. So the idea is that you're using these variances to be able to build what you want on smaller things. So the minimum lot size in our code is being varied through the variance application. So we're approving a smaller lot for what the code actually is requiring if it's affordable.
Yeah, and I guess I'm
Does that make
wondering
sense?
if that's the case. Like if your lot is 90% of a 7,000 square foot lot, can't do that math off the top of my head, a 10% reduction of that would equal that lot size. Could you now do a cottage cluster with this variance allowed in the code? Okay.
That's the idea. Yes, yeah.
Okay, and I guess as you shop this with developers, understanding the impact of those minimum lot area requirements and what they're looking for there, I think would be an area that I'm particularly interested in.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and when all the minimum lot sizes were all prepared or created, that was all through that House Bill 2001 stuff. And at the time, the conversation was really trying to encourage the middle housing, piece to get built, which is why those lot sizes are so small. And the single detached home is still on a 5,000 square foot lot, sort of trying to kind of incentivize folks building more units on smaller lots or, what have you. It's come back that someone, has, we had a partition last year for a 4,500 square foot lot and they have to put a duplex on it. You can't put they would have to get a variance if they wanted the single family and try to go through our code for that. But so we've run into these, you have to build a duplex on this lot because it's less than 5,000 square feet. And people are like, okay, that's what we're doing. And so that's kind of how it's worked in sort of in day to day, with the minimum lot sizes, we are actually getting more units on smaller lots than we
Oh,
might
that's
have
good
normally.
news.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
It is great, yeah. Okay. Some of the other variances, and again, borrowed several of these from Senate Bill 1537, variances that talk about our requirements for bike parking, like the number of spaces that you need and the location. The maximum building height, we are proposing that, an additional story or 20 feet, except for cottage clusters, that's so codified in House Bill 2001 about cottages being a certain height, and so cottages in a cottage cluster would not be allowed to have the extra height. Maximum density increase of 25% over the maximum density. Right now, we do have maximum density for multi-unit residential and single detached dwellings. There is a maximum density that's applied to those housing types depending on the zone that they're in. So the idea here is to increase that maximum density for affordable units. So we get more units in the box or in the Jello mold that we're creating. We have a couple of requirements in the downtown mixed-use zone that limits where residential dwellings can be. We don't allow ground floor residential along Main Street in the downtown, so the idea is that you can get a variance to that, and we could have that. Again, this is all up for discussion. And then there's also language in our code about non-residential support uses like lobbies and gyms and that kind of thing we have some language in there that those can only take up a certain amount of space, within the building, that this would be part of one of the variances that you could ask for, that you could in fact do the full residential building and not have that ground floor active space that the downtown code is requiring if it's an affordable development. There are a couple of, some of the SB 1537 variances are for things that we don't require them, so they don't all match up, but these were a couple of things that seemed worth discussing, that we have some of these restrictions in the downtown that maybe we want to open up and talk about for affordable units. There are some design standards that are on the list of variances that are related to facade articulation, sort of what is the facade doing. That adds to construction cost when you have to have lots of different shapes and walls on your building. That we require, multiple design features. You can go down to only 3 of them as part of this package. Total window area. We do still require the 12%, but we currently require 15%. We require and higher numbers in some of our downtown requirements and in our multifamily or multi-unit as well. So, and this was pulled from SB 1537 as well, that they had sort of these glazing requirements. So they have a list of design standards that they are asking communities to vary as well as part of the developments.
So our current code is 15%?
15% for single detached, up to quadplexes. It's 15% glazing as well. It used to be 12, and we bumped it up to 15 for the streetscape and for the design standards. So, okay. And then of course, we have approval criteria. How do we know that someone's, meeting all of these? So we have, our type 2 variance, our criteria are related to impacts, to neighboring. So that those, we are pulling those same approval criteria for our type 2s. And then some of these approval criteria are kind of cribbed from the Senate Bill 1537 language, and it's pretty open and discretionary. We'd love to hear some feedback, because I'm not sure how even when we were reading the 1537 statute, wondering how would we know? What kind of evidence would they need to show? But it talks about that the project or the dwellings can be accommodated by existing and planned infrastructure capacities, making sure that they will not have a verifiable adverse impact to city services, that the provision is in a manner consistent. It's pretty, like I said, very discretionary. And then, of course, the provisions to guarantee that the dwelling units would remain affordable, as part of our timeline. And I know, these are pretty open discretionary criteria. I'm happy to chat with them about what we think about these? What do people need to show for approval criteria? Or is it enough that they're meeting the affordability requirements? So that's something for us to talk about. I know we've been talking about that in-house, kind of what do we need them to prove? Is it enough that it's an affordable project that's meeting our income restrictions and for the development? And that's obviously the variances are being asked for to make the project work. Why else would they be asking for them? So trying to kind of get an understanding of sort of the universe of what council might think about what sort of approval criteria should we be asking for as part of the decision-making process.
And the more we've been talking about it, and Vera and I talked about it, and Counselor Anderson brought it up in some questions, and the more I think about it, I know we proposed this, but I would really like to hear what your all's thoughts are, because I, in some ways, think that if they are meeting the affordability requirements, I don't know why we would be asking them to prove some of these other things, because it just puts a burden on them when they're actually just meeting the affordability criteria, and that's what we're looking for. So I don't need them to prove to me that it's not going to have very adverse impact to our city services.
Well, I was going to say, I think that a lot of that came from, what was going on at the same time as 1537 was a lot of cities pushing back about how they don't have the sewer extension to the area, or they don't have, whatever, the sewer, the water, so, I think a lot of that is in that, and it doesn't seem to me, hopefully, what we're doing with our CIP and all of that is taking care of sewer and water. I think the big question is roads, and good old Harrison Street among them, and road capacity. I wouldn't want to give them, I still think we need to think about transportation impacts. But the other ones don't seem to me, like, how would they prove that? How would they prove we have enough sewer capacity to?
Yeah.
We're better suited to prove that, to determine that,
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
So it doesn't seem a thing you ask the developer to do.
We agree. Yeah, we thought about it some more. We're like, maybe this isn't applicable here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the whole context of, some pushback about, sort of, especially the cities up at the urban growth boundary who have land inside the boundary but don't have
The services. And
extended
can't
to
provide
it.
the services. It makes it really expensive, right? Yeah,
Right.
I agree.
Right.
And also just to add, this doesn't get rid of what a developer would be required to do if they did have to upscale or upsize a pipe. They would still have to do that. It's not like we would say, no, sorry, and we're not going to build it. We'd say, yeah, it's great, but you'll have to also provide this part of it.
And engineering can still ask for a transportation impact study as well.
Right.
That is part of our development process. So that is still in the mix. Yeah.
Other thoughts? Okay.
I would agree with Laura. If we're already setting the precedent of what we're asking for, I just feel like this is an unnecessary hoop to have to jump through, and you'll probably get more that turn away, because it's like, another step. There's already so much that they have to go through for it. So I just think this is overkill.
We're learning as we go, as you can see. We're working through this ourselves and asking ourselves these questions as well. So we're happy to be here. We're open to all the ideas because we're trying to figure it out ourselves.
Councilor Anderson?
Yeah, the specific sections that I see as overkill are probably E1, the whole list there, and the provisions that say you need to prove, there are multiple references that say the housing developer must provide evidence showing that the adjustment is necessary to make the housing units economically feasible. I think that those two different instances of additional requirements seem either duplicative with standards we already have in our code, or above and beyond the fact that we just want more affordable housing. Though I do like the provision in E2, so I think that E is something that's important, just not the section 1.
I think one of the things, and I think Councilor Anderson, you brought this up, and the more we talked about the, the discretionary criteria, that it's something that they need to show, but it, given it's a type 2 process, there's public notice, it opens up, everyone to appeal and all kinds of other things too, if we can't sort of really understand what does this even mean? How would somebody show it? It works both ways. It cuts both ways, I guess. And it could be really difficult for, everyone to try to work through that from a land use processing, land use review process as well.
Could we, sorry, Mayor, and sorry, Vera. I actually, we got kind of 2 votes, I feel like, on this one little section. I'd love to, would you mind just kind of closing this off, if you wouldn't mind having a discussion of whether this section of E about list of approval criteria in addition to the affordability criteria, is there a sense of yay or nay on that? It sounds like Councilor Anderson and Councilor Kosbrady are for removing it. Love to get just a little bit more direction there, and that would help. Since it is a big section and it's also maybe superfluous, or maybe something that people want to keep involved so that we have a little more requirement, a little more ask of the developer.
Do you want to go ahead?
Just a thought. I wonder if we could add some language around it being a review of the planning manager for that section, like, could be waived at the discretion of the planning manager. That way, it still gives you the ability to look at the application and see if there's some weird reason that we should have that in consideration. Or do you feel like that's too subjective and you don't want that responsibility?
Yeah, it is a little subjective. Sorry? Findings, yeah, it's a little bit tricky with the findings. The planning manager has decided, no, that she doesn't think that this is required.
Okay.
So it kind of makes it onerous on me to explain why without having to do kind of a rigorous analysis. So,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. Then I guess I would be in favor of taking it out. I just thought that, for some strange reason that we can't imagine, that there would be some need for it in the future, but, I don't know, we can cross that bridge when we come to it, I guess.
Well, I mean, the E1E, the sufficient provisions to guarantee that the dwelling units would remain affordable in the future. I think that's super important. But whether that needs to be here or whether that can be dealt with, yeah. I mean, again, I think the rest of those are mostly things that, the city's in a better position than the developer to determine. Yeah.
So may I? So did section E come out of one of these, was that taken from another example?
That came from 1537, the Senate bill.
This was the model?
Yep,
Okay,
the statute, yep.
okay. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that I don't think it adds a lot, but at the same time, I wonder, why did they put it in there to begin with?
Why we're seeking the exemption. So we can handle it on our own.
Okay.
It does create some, obviously, it's very discretionary. It creates some potential just chaos, quite frankly, it's very similar in variance language that you have these very discretionary pieces. But the language that I'm reading here and that you're all reading this opens it up for neighbors to be like, well, actually, I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't agree. And as the mayor has pointed out, we'll certainly have reports that show yay or nay on as far as service levels. So I agree with what Laura's been saying, and I think it's just, it was there, and my guess is just it was put out there for cities to feel a little bit like they had some control at the end, but that's all.
Councilor Kosrabati?
Just one last comment, looking at it from a contractor or developer, all that it kind of reads out is slow down, right? Like slow down the project, which means more money, which means it's going to change certain aspects of the AMI. And Yeah, so just looking at it from that perspective, it just looks like it'll slow down the project.
Oh, Counselor Anderson?
As I flip around, it looks like section E and section D have been flipped, but I wonder if, or maybe my packet's all messed up, but I wonder if section E1E that the mayor is referring to about continuing affordability and ensuring provision of that is not already covered in subsection D that requires that.
Or it could certainly be,
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll make
It
sure
could
it's
be
not
called
being
out there.
duplicative. We'll go through with that lens for sure. Yeah.
okay?
Not to be too nerdy about it, but part of it's what they need to submit as an application and what do we need to issue as findings. So as part of the approval, so that affordability piece for E could be a finding that, we have confirmed that this is going to be their because the finding is part of the notice of decision, not necessarily their application materials. So I don't love being redundant either, but there may be a place so that the decision is really clear about how we're codifying within the notice of decision, how it's going to be, maintain that affordability. So
Thank you, Vera, because I'm always trying to go in and trying to remove redundancies, and then I'm immediately told that, no, we can't do that because they're there for a reason. So I'm always trying to do that.
sorry, Laura. Okay. And then finally, just the review process, it would be an expedited type 2 review with a slightly compressed to 100 days. That matches the affordable housing review process that is already in state law, but we make sure that it's very clear that it's part of this as well. And then again, that the language that's in there already about priority processing for the application. So it doesn't get kind of stuck anywhere else, that the land use review, that all of the other departments kind of work with us on an affordable, which we kind of already do. We know that, for example, Hillside and some of those projects that we're trying our best to keep things moving, streamline those as best we can so they don't get held up.
Okay, can you go back to the slide about the number of units and the affordability? Because frankly, I don't think we have enough time for the conversation that this warrants. So we may have to come back because we can't really go late today. But picking up on what Councilor Khosrowshahi said, I feel like it's a weird thing to me. I feel like we're being very prescriptive in the 99 years. That's a long time, when we've traditionally talked about 30 years. So I was interested to hear you say that that is becoming the standard. But then these to me seem way too little, like they're not going to change. Well, first off, like I said, I looked up AMI and then I looked up Milwaukee's census data on income. Our median household income was $82,000 compared to an AMI of 117,000. So Milwaukie, we had this conversation a couple of years ago. Councilor Anderson wasn't with us, but the rest of us had this conversation with the housing production strategy, and with the consultant you used at the time. 100% of AMI is 120% of Milwaukie median income, or more, actually. It's actually, using those numbers, it's almost 140%. 100% of AMI is 140% of Milwaukee's median income. We know that, the stuff that we're getting built by the market, the 7 acres and the Henley Place, they're at 120% of AMI. They're not, outside of what we would be saying people can build and get all these incentives for. So it seems to me like these numbers are too high. And also, I guess I also, like I said earlier, it feels to me like we should have a multifamily because what's 10% of units if you only build 3 units? Is it 10%? Is it always at least 1 unit? Okay. Yeah, I just, I think this is great if we're talking multifamily. I guess I'm worried about what happens when we're talking about I mean, I think it's great, except not the 120% AMI. If we're talking multifamily, but I was gonna say, I think my view of it and some of the questions you've raised, like the downtown mixed use and whether there has to be ground floor, whether it could be ground floor residential, I would say yes if you're building 100%, but no if you're building 10 or 20%, you know? I mean, I think that's a very different question. Like how much of the building is affordable to get those kind of, you know, permissive changes to, you know, our downtown zone.
Just say that last part again, Mayor. Repeat that last part.
Well, so one of the other slides brought up the idea that one of the incentives could be to allow affordable housing in downtown zones to not have to have retail on the ground floor.
Right, yeah.
To allow it to have residential on the ground floor. And to me, that's a very different question if the building's 100% affordable than if the building's 10% affordable.
If it's 100%, you could say, yeah, we don't need ground floor retail. But if it's only 10% affordable, then you would say, no, you're going to have to put in ground floor retail. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah. So we can kind of try to think through that a little bit more and look at the numbers, I think. And then also making sure that we're still in alignment with what Joseph's programs are doing as well. Right.
Yeah, yeah, sorry, I'm thinking about a question too, back, because, yes. Yes, my question back to council though, and I think this is kind of where you're going to is, sorry, Laura. We do talk about 3 or more dwelling units. If there is a desire here to make a program that's more focused on more density, that's something too, because that also is saying we want to incentivize more density versus just any type, 3 units or less. There's something to be said for that, I think. So as you were saying, multiple dwelling units, apartment complexes being more of this, that's something I think is worth talking about, unless that's not something the rest of the council is excited about. But I want to throw it out there because this, that's how a lot of these code sections started, was primarily a focus on multi-tenant buildings.
Yeah.
But then sorry, go ahead.
But then cottage clusters came.
I was gonna say, I guess, like what I see a way somebody could game this is they've got a 6,000 square foot lot, they're gonna build 4 units. They're gonna build 3, 1,800 square foot market rate units and 1 tiny little ADU type unit, and to qualify them to get all these variances, right? So, I mean, I am worried about the gaming the system in the middle housing context. I would love, and that's where we maybe want to think about, how many units and what's the percentage of maybe it's about the percentage of the square feet being built as opposed to just purely number of units. Because I think there's some, Councilor Kosarbati?
That's a good point. So if I'm hearing right, it's like they would use that to get that extra like story, for example, and then add another whole 4 units of market rate.
Yeah.
Well, could you put that if they get with that added story, that also has to be affordable, a portion of that, if you get that added story, so they don't try to game the system?
I have been under the understanding that, yes, absolutely, that would remain affordable. Whatever the incentive goes to has to support affordable housing.
Add that.
Yeah.
They don't just have 1 unit of affordability and then or does it actually, wait, does it change though? If they get that variance, so now their percentages change with that 1, right? So if you add a story, you have 8 units and 1 affordable, so doesn't that change that percentage number quite a bit? Oh, well, I guess you're still at 12%.
Oh, somebody.
Anyways, go ahead.
So is the question, I think you might be hitting on something, or at least moving us
Like
towards
you
something.
reassess the percentage if you add another story.
It's a total unit
Right.
count, but I think also within the question, and correct me if I'm wrong, is does the incentives also speak to the other units that are involved, especially when it comes to middle housing? That's something that is not clear, I would say, in here. So like for instance, if you had, to what the mayor was speaking to, a fourplex or just 4 cottages, and one of those was income restricted, does that whole development, because I think that's kind of what this is speaking to, receive all of these incentives, even though it's just one? That to me actually seems a bit like gaming. So I think that's worth thinking through.
It is gaming, but it's also getting one affordable unit when we would not get any at all. So it's both things. Both things can be true at the same time, I think.
That's true, but I mean, yeah. I mean, where's the balance of the benefit for the impact on the neighborhood and the livability of the people in the neighborhood? I mean, if we're now talking a floor bonus, so you can go to 4 floors in a otherwise block of 1 and 2 story homes, that's a pretty significant,
Just one thing on a time check, it is 5. And 2, just, I think this is interesting, going back to Councilor Anderson's point about considering if the 99 is too restrictive for folks building middle housing. I mean, it might be a deterrent to the exact example the mayor is using, because for that 800 square foot affordable ADU, you're probably not going to want to, figure out a way to deed restrict it for 99 years. But yes, it is 5. We do have our folks here for the regular session. So what I think we might want to do is have another work session on this code. We'll come back responding to the great feedback you guys gave and keep the conversation going.
Thank you, planning. And Joseph.
Thank you. Yeah, well done, Vera, Laura.
Yeah,
Thank you. Have fun tonight.
it's exciting.
It's very exciting.
we need 5 minutes for reset and of the video and to let the audience in and stuff. So we will adjourn our work session and convene in 5 minutes to get our regular session moving. Oh, we start with the swearing in. So that's not with me. I'm not any part of that. So, but the judge is here and the judge will start with the swearing in 5 minutes. Okay.